So the footy's on at the moment.
Is it?
I don't know if you've noticed. I don't know if you've been anywhere within 50 yards of a pub recently, probably 300 yards of a pub over the weekend. You might have heard it. You might have known that the football was on. And I'm going to preface this immediately by saying, I don't watch football. I don't normally care about football.
You what, mate?
Are we going to have to take this outside, son?
No, please.
Harry's
like a foot taller than me, like 100 pounds heavier.
He's a big guy.
That's, well, thanks. But anyway, so yeah, I don't really watch the football. I don't know much about football, but I do know what the media always says about the football. And I always know the media reactions whenever football happens at the moment with the England team, because the England team has a number of people who are of mixed or just outright foreign ancestry on there. And that always turns into the story whenever anything goes right with the football. From what I can tell, there's a few things, which is that you're only allowed to be a nationalist when it comes to football, when it's football series. And the only nationalism that you're allowed to be a fan of when it comes to the football is that you're allowed to be proud of the fact that your country is strong in its diversity and inclusive to people of all backgrounds. This is the modern narrative. And the football seems to me to be a way in which the media likes to continue to push that. And in fact, the football is Gareth Southgate, the manager.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that Gareth Southgate, the manager, likes to push it as well because he's unapologetically woke and he wants the team to act as a media arm for diversity.
We did a segment a week or two ago where even Sadiq Khan was making noises about the St George's flag should probably be kept to a minimum, even during big football tournaments. So
how did he feel about the kneeling last time?
Even this probably loved it, didn't he?
Oh yeah,
the ritual humiliation of that. Probably loved it, even though he's obviously got nothing to do with George Floyd. But yeah, they would like to even dial down the small amount of national pride you're sort of allowed during big tournaments. Even that, a lot of them would rather we didn't.
Okay, so if they did that, what would be the reason for most people to even watch the football then? If they can't wave the St George's flag and just be proud of themselves and happy and go out for a pint and enjoy themselves, what's the point?
The love of actual football, maybe. But,
from my limited experience, you don't go to the pub to watch the football to sit there in perfect silence.
Right. No, right.
Nursing a single pint or maybe even a sherry. That's not what you watch the football for. I was in the pub over the weekend. I wasn't even watching the football. I was spending some time with friends. But I could hear everyone constantly. I was trying to get around the corner away from people, but it was deafening.
It's strange, though. It's almost as if rather than cheering on, footballers drawn exclusively or primarily from the native population, increasingly it's like cheering on mercenaries in an army rather than actual native members of that people. But it's a total waste of patriotic energy in my view. And I'd also add, Harry, that it's not just the case that they make the football all about this sort of woke guff when the team does well, as indeed the team did do well against Switzerland. And I think all 5 players have some kind of ancestral connection to a place other than England. And this is why they were touting it as an example of, the virtues of diversity in action. It's also when things go badly. They will also find a pretext when things go badly. In 2021, when it so happened, and I wouldn't want to make too much of this, but if they're going to make a lot of it when things go well, it seems natural that people are going to respond in kind. I think in 2021, 2 players who happened to be black were the ones who missed the decisive penalties in the final against Italy.
I believe it was 3, looking back at the reporting that was going on back then, but I might be wrong.
I remember, it might have been 3, but the 2 that I remember were Bukayo Saka, missed a penalty for England, and Jordan Sancho, who's mixed race.
I think it might have also been Marcus Rashford as well.
You're right, Marcus Rashford.
Because I remember there was a mural in Salford that got defaced after it.
But then they focused on the really, really negative reaction against those black players. And even though many of these negative comments, it's later transpired, were drawn from places like as remote as North Africa. It wasn't as if people were railing against.
A lot of Italians.
Lots of Italians, lots of people other than...
And they're the ones who beat us.
Indeed, lots of people other than native English people being openly racist against these players. And it was only about 12 comments, if I recall, or something like that as well. But they will also make a meal out of that. So it's very much a case of heads, diversity wins, tails, white people lose. There's no way of winning. They'll always find a way of shoehorning race communism into the picture.
It's interesting that you mentioned the old reaction from back then, because I wanted to just remind everybody of what the reporting was at the time. And it's very interesting because even if you go on random industry websites like this ILM from 2021, they look at Gareth Southgate's leadership style and they say, what can we learn from this? What can we learn from Gareth Southgate's management of the English football team? And if you go down, one of the things they highlight is equality. We can learn equality from it. And they quote him saying, it's in our duty to continue to interact with the public on matters such as equality, inclusivity, and racial justice, while using the power of our voices to help put debates on the table, raise awareness, and educate. So again, rather than being purely a team playing an international sport, trying to seek glory for its home country, it's a political tool. It's a mode of propaganda where they go, look, here's a bunch of foreigners on the team, but they're doing it in your name. Therefore, they are of that nation in the first place. Therefore, diversity is our strength, etc., etc., etc. And it's interesting to see that how far this went, where even business websites were trying to promote it as well.
The thing I will say is that the concept of let's kick racism out of football is very old. I remember being in the 1990s, it was already a slogan. People like John Barnes were talking about racism in football back in the 70s or
Southgate
the 80s,
was playing for England back in the 90s, wasn't
Southgate? Did you say sorry?
Yeah.
He missed a penalty in Euro 96, famously.
Correct.
He waddled it over the bar. And
so he was within that environment and that sludge already back then. He seems to have just carried it on into the modern period.
Yeah. I don't know why he's so woke. I guess he's just weak-willed. Just, Jedi mind tricks work on him. I don't know. He's a footballer, right? He's not a political philosopher. He's not a sociologist.
And that lacks.
But apparently they're treating him like a business magnate.
Okay.
He lacks the intellectual resources to resist against trends. Is basically the point.
I think so.
Yeah, and they all
his leadership style. Sorry, what leadership style? It's just Gareth Southgate. It's not. There's no leadership style. It's just him saying, "Yeah, I picked these guys."
He's also been gifted with, it must be said, but both the native British players and the mixed race players included, a very, very gifted generation of England players. I suspect any manager would have done pretty well with them, and he indeed has not won a trophy yet. He's got the furthest he's got is to the final in Euro 2020.
And to
We got to the semis, didn't we, in the World Cup?
I think
Wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. No, not in the most recent World Cup. Maybe we did. I can't recall. No, we didn't get to the semis in the most recent World Cup. But in 2018, we got to the semis and lost to Croatia.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, later on today, I think we're playing the semi-finals
against the Netherlands.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes.
I've got my fingers crossed, of course, but I fear they'll be a bit too strong for us. Hope not, of course.
This is the thing for me, though. So I unlike you, Harry, I don't know about you, but sounds like you know quite a bit about football, and I naturally love football, but I never get excited over England anymore, and in part because of the attendant sort of woke politics that comes with it. I just have no time for it. I am one of those people who goes to the pub and sits in the corner and watches it quietly and enjoys it as a sporting spectacle. There's no sort of nationalistic fervor for me
you're
anymore.
Watching it purely for the technical expertise being shown. No, as a fan of wanky technical guitar playing, I can kind of respect that.
That's what it is.
I have a similar thing. I love football. It's been a big part of my life since childhood. I actually did an interview with Matt Lotus, famous living legend, Matthew Letizia.
Brilliant player.
Which one of the greatest penalty takers of all time, actually. And that's on the website if anyone wants to check that out.
Yeah.
But I got a similar thing. Back in, it must have been the very early 2000s. Can't remember which tournament it was. It was the last time Michael Owen was playing. And he blew his knee out in the middle of the game. And we did badly in that tournament. And ever since then, I obviously still watch them and still interested and still cheer for England and everything. But ever since then, so I was in like my early, mid-20s, late 20s, something like that. I don't get as excited as I used to. When I was a teenager or a kid, big tournaments, the World Cup, it was the most important thing in my life. It was so important to me. I was so happy when we'd won. I was genuinely emotionally distraught when we get knocked out. Well, I'm just not like that anymore. Now I watch the game, cheer if we win, when we concede, all that sort of thing. But I I keep it in perspective. I'm not, maybe it's just because I'm older and more cynical now. I don't know. But you say going to the pub. I was actually in the pub with Devon Tracy, aka Atheism is Unstoppable, at the weekend.
What a name.
We're mates. In IRL.
You mean the Devon Tracy?
Devon Tracy.
Oh my God.
And it's just an excuse to go a bit mental when you score a goal, though, isn't it? So again, when I was young,
that's what I was hearing.
When I go to West Ham and we score a goal, you go berserk. And there's not really much window to do that in civilized life, really. Literally jumping up and down, screaming at the top of your voice. when do you get to do that as a civilized human grown up man, other than when your team score?
No, absolutely. But I will say, given that the both of you are saying that your enthusiasm outside of those small moments has drained somewhat, it is a shame that the overt politicization of the whole thing has really drained some of your energy.
Totally.
For it, because it should be something, and I this may sound a bit cliche, it should be something that's a bit more universal than whatever the political hot butt topic at the moment is.
Yeah.
But it's been made very, very political through the actions of Southgate and through the actions of the media as well, and through just the realities of day-to-day life in England and the rest of Britain at the moment. And like you said, Harrison, even when they lost, they had to try and turn it around into something where it was still hitting that same point. Diversity is strong. We lost, but it was possibly because we weren't diverse enough. Obviously, our strength hadn't fully found it.
The basic formula, if I can just very quickly, from my understanding, is this: if we win, that's proof that diversity is a strength. That's quite an easy thing, and particularly if the black players do well in an outside sense, as indeed they did against who did we play? Against Switzerland. If we lose, and there's a backlash against certain players, even if the backlash isn't actually racially motivated, as in most cases it isn't, it's usually just personal abuse. I'm not saying I support that, but it's not racially charged personal abuse, then it proves that the native population is irredeemably racist and therefore merit exactly the kind of replacement that makes diversity worth celebrating when we win. So it really is a catch-22 situation.
That's why you should hate the media.
Indeed so.
But this article is a perfect example of what we're talking there, because it's from 2 years old. It says, England may have lost, but Southgate's team shows us the nation we can be, from this presumably native Scot, I assume, which is interesting because
sorry, I've just seen it.
is saying the practical and moral argument that our diversity is our strength has long been made, and this team proves it. Again, they lost at the time, but even so, they still have to spin it. They have to spin it into being something aspirational. Don't worry, if the rest of England looks like this, we too can be second place in everything. This is the aspiration that we're going for. The same way that I believe, what was it, the Tories in the lead up to the election were saying about how we are the second biggest soft power in the world. This is not aspirational. Yeah. This is you can be first of the losers. If you adopt all of my terrible, insane, progressive attitudes to everything, you can be second best. Oh, fantastic! I'm sure that's what Cecil Rhodes. That's what the entire empire was about, right?
Lord Curzon was always on the seeking second best.
Clearly,
what a reference. Curzon,
and this article's got some interesting things. It reminds everybody about the Danny Boyle Olympic opening ceremony, which thank you for reminding me of that. Absolute travesty. He says here, there were naysayers, particularly those who condemned the diversity and inclusivity projected by it as woke. Still, most others are proud to see a presentation to the world of not exactly who we are, but a snapshot of the modern nation we would like to be. We being the media talking class. But again, it's this idea is aspirational. We're on the wave there, but we're not quite there yet. The multicultural revolution is a never-ending project, really. It's a permanent revolution.
Some white boys haven't had the common decency to disappear yet. So, mission not accomplished just yet.
There's still a bit of pale, pasty skin on this team, so I don't know. We're not quite there yet. But he goes on to say, as a British Black Londoner, son of Windrush generation, I find it has never been so easy to support an England team. It's northern, southern, black, white, mixed heritage, young, it's experienced, it's multi-denominational, possibly. It has players who excel at their jobs and earn a fortune doing them, but try in various ways to ground themselves in the lives of a society in which they are a fetid part. They do good things. We read about them in tabloids. They do stupid things. We read about them in tabloids. Blah-de-blah-de-blah. Some of us has long made the practical and moral argument that Britain's diversity is an strength. So he's just saying that, the point of this team, as it exists right now, is purely propaganda. Yes, you can go to the pub, you can cheer, you can scream when they score a goal, but what you're really supposed to be taking away from it is not the excellence being displayed on the football pitch, is not the union that you get with the people around you as you're taking in the moment. It's that you should look at it and go, diversity is our strength. Diversity is, you keep hammering that point home. Diversity is our strength. And you mentioned the racist abuse. Obviously, when it turned out that they didn't actually score, the story became, well, it was so terrible of the natives of this country, even though they weren't really the ones doing it when people looked into it. And they know that this is another worry in this Euros as well, where people have been saying, well, they better do better this time, because otherwise the same thing is going to happen again, and we might not be the perfect diverse nation that we're trying to be.
It's funny as well. Again, I can't remember all the details. It's fairly hazy. It's 2021. But in sort of the footballing punditry world, including the amateur pundits who exist on Twitter, who are often much more insightful, it must be said, than the professional pundits like Gary Neville. Although I do quite like Jeremy Carragher. I think his analysis is usually pretty shrewd. But in any case, most of the complaints were not directed at the three black gentlemen who missed. They were directed primarily at Southgate, in particular because I think it was Marcus Rashford in particular. It might have been Jordan Sancho as well. They're both usually quite good penalty takers in football matches. So he brought them on very, very late in the game with roughly about 2 minutes left so that they could take penalties. You might say, well, that sounds like a sensible tactical move. It's actually not, because usually you have an advantage in football. If you've already been playing for about an hour, you've got into the groove, and you're going to be much better taking a penalty. These guys would have had quite cold feet. They wouldn't have really got into their groove yet. And so most of the criticism was directed at Southgate, veritably white, for that tactical blunder.
And again, for the other part of it, with Southgate being unapologetically woke, I believe the intention was also to put the more diverse parts of the team at the forefront and put them into positions where they could potentially fail, because if they succeed, well, then you can turn it into the national story. And that's what they've been trying to do, because over the weekend we had the Switzerland game. I believe we scored most, if not all of them. We won. We scored all of them. We won, and then you get articles like this. Paul Elliott reveals his pride as 5 footballers of black heritage smash racial stereotypes. Is there a racial stereotype that black people can't take penalties?
Not particularly.
Well,
no, not at all. No, that's not a thing. No.
That was just a very confusing part of this headline.
When we did digging, we found out that actually in North Africa there may be one, but not in these.
Really?
No, honestly, it was extraordinary. There was a whole sort of Spectator editorial where they went into these. Who are these people on Instagram? These shady characters on Instagram who are sort of accusing the black players of missing because they were black, and a huge proportion of them came from North Africa.
Really?
I recall that.
I see what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure those sorts of stereotypes will exist there.
All right. I thought you were saying that North African players are worse at taking penalties. No. I see what you're saying now. Right, yeah.
Thank you for inviting me to clarify. That's very helpful.
Thank you. So you can see again, they say one of the lines from here: no amount of off-field work, being the media appearances and all of the propaganda they push in the interviews and such, is as powerful as the sight of 5 England players of ethnic heritage firing their country into a European Championship semi-final. So again, remember, if they lose, diversity is our strength. But really, if they win, diversity is really our strength. We've never been stronger. At the moment, let's see how the semis go later today.
Really, to me, just really lame, really pathetic that it's any tiny thing. Like we invented everything. And when we score a bunch of penalties, aren't we great? Sort of as a race, as an ethnicity, just constantly blackwashing other people's history and things. It's really pathetic. It's really weak. I think.
No, I agree with you. And again, it shows the fragility of the whole multicultural project, which is this group, the media seems to treat it as this group needs constant BSing. Constant BSing. So because they're, as a group, so insecure that if they're not constantly being BS'd, they'll go crazy and start being violent.
You don't need a relentless diet of propaganda to establish as a truth in the nation that kittens are cute. If this was so self-evidently true, they wouldn't be constantly feeding us with these, as you say, this constant BSing, this constant gaslighting.
It's the same problem with the whole multicultural project being a never-ending project. Well, if it was so strong and so naturally self-evident that this is just the best and most efficient way to order a society, why does it constantly need the nudge and the pressure of social engineering? Why does it constantly need an enormous media and bureaucratic apparatus to even keep it semi-functioning? Why does it have to be that you need hate speech laws to stop the natives of European countries from protesting against it? If it was really all it's made up to be, why would you need any of that?
Think about it. It's so weird. 5 English black lads score some penalties in Germany one time. So everyone from St. Louis to Cape Town can pat themselves on their back for having roughly the same amount of melanin in their skin. Like, what? What are you talking about? What nonsense. Nonsense.
But again, one of the interesting things is this has been pushed for this is why we need migration. This was one that was going about, let's see, it's got a little over 2,000 likes. This meme, England doesn't win without immigration. And it takes out the names of all of the people who have immigration background who are on the team. The interesting thing, again, showing that this team really isn't very native at all, which is very interesting. But also it's the fact that, well, if we didn't have all of these people, I don't mean to sound harsh, there would be other people to fill those slots. Of
course there would be.
In the same team who might be just as good. They might be a little bit worse. They might be better. You don't know because you're talking about a pure hypothetical. But I've got to say, I don't know how the selection process works for who gets into the England team. But I can't imagine...
Gareth Southgate picks them.
Gareth Southgate picks them. I very much doubt, given how much of a political operator he is and how highly politicized the team is, that he's done a really detailed survey of every team in the entire country to pick out the absolute best of the best. I'm sure he's picked out, from what you're saying, some very, very, very good football.
He's spoiled for choice, frankly. He really is.
Yeah. But consider this. It's probably working in the same way that it worked in university admissions in America for a long time. You've got 2 candidates, both of whom are about equally qualified. If one has ethnic minority background, you basically add 5 points onto them and choose them. Mm-hmm. I would imagine it's something like that.
It's a classic thing. England has suffered from what I'm about to say for decades. That they will nearly always pick, with a few exceptions, the sort of the most famous, most well-played players, regardless of really if they're in form and stuff. For example, Rooney towards the end of his career, it was just a slam dunk that he would get picked, regardless of anything. If he's fit, he gets picked. He always played kind of crap for England. I mean, he scored tons of goals, but often he would play poorly.
In tournaments, he didn't tend to score as many.
Yeah. Often he would play poorly for England. And there's someone like Matt Lotus, where he only ever played for Southampton. He never played for Man United or Liverpool or whatever.
Never got an England. He got nine England caps or something. Something tiny like that.
Yeah. And he never had the England career he deserved because he wasn't a big enough name. And this is what's happening now. It's happened for decades and decades. They pick the most famous ones, really, the ones that play for the biggest teams. Not necessarily a pure meritocracy. But there you go. It's not an exact science.
It's true. I'm sure the meritocratic way of operating has been diminished slightly in this sort of post-Floyd era in the England team. But I will say one of the things that makes the England football team different from Harvard admissions is that it's a much more public process in which the vast majority of the nation, or a significant minority of the nation, feel they have a very personal, emotional stake. And so for example, someone like Foden, who is a white player, has had such a wonderful season at Man City that there would just be an uproar if Gareth Southgate for woke, on the grounds of woke criteria, did not pick him. And so Gareth Southgate has much less maneuver than the Harvard admissions department do when it comes to watering down meritocratic standards, I would say. But I'm sure it's had some effect.
Again, I can't really dispute that. You guys are helping me along with this quite nicely. But again, I will just say that from a layman, from somebody who doesn't really know much about all of this, I would be shocked if there weren't political considerations into the choice of the team, because, I mean, Southgate has all but said that there is, and the media is treating it like there is. And here's one of my favourites, this clanger from Diane Abbott, everybody's favourite. We all know that she's an intellectual giant of British politics, giants of the English football team. Meanwhile, Reform is complaining about immigration. I mean, mainly illegal immigration.
How do those things connect? Like, really?
That's a bit of a strange comparison to make. But again, the whole argument that's being made here is football good. You want to do well in football, throw open the gates to your country, make sure you've got open borders, and then you might win a trophy.
Look, first thing that's worth saying is that we won the World Cup in 1966 without a single mixed race or black player in the team, just a detail. The second thing I would say is that I'm very happy to sacrifice a slight drop-off in sporting achievement, even assuming that this immigrant infusion is necessary. I'm very happy to sacrifice a slight drop-off in sporting achievement in order to have a more unified national culture, which would necessarily have to include its demographic underpinnings, which is, the more homogeneity you have, the more likely you are to be a cohesive national culture. So if we could get rid of race politics tomorrow, because it would have no purchase in Britain, because we were as homogeneous as Japan, but we did as well as in Japan in national tournaments, which is to say not very well, that's fine with me.
No, absolutely. I mean, Diane Abbott's basically saying, it's a non-sequitur really, she's basically saying that there's a few black lads in the first England team, so endless Bangladeshis and Afghanistanis? Just an endless stream of those then?
Now, where are they in the team?
Yeah.
Where are any of these guys from Somali backgrounds?
No,
I don't think so. No.
No.
Yeah.
Then why are 72% of the Somalis in London in social housing? Then why do we need them?
Why can't we make distinctions? Even if we do want to, to have some immigration policy slightly weighted in favour of having, people who I think most of these chaps probably be of West African descent.
I'd imagine so.
Fine, but just say that and make these distinctions. Be open about it.
It really does show, actually, now that we've spoken about this, that even somebody like Diane Abbott really does see the entirety of the immigration debate about the natives versus what is essentially just a giant organic biomass of brown foreigners that are completely undifferentiated from one another. It's just the Englishman versus everybody who's not from Europe. So there's
not just brown.
Interesting.
All of whom get on notoriously well.
Not just brown skin, but immigration in general. So we really, by rights, should have somebody in the team that's an ex-Albanian convict. Really, shouldn't we? To be fair, if we're going to be.
Yeah.
Where have you pulled convicts from? Or are you just thinking, well, there's no chance of getting an Albanian who isn't an ex-convict? No.
Is it not the case that a lot of Albanians that come here are
cocaine dealers?
Are criminal Albanians?
One of the most I think we now have an agreement with Albania, which means that many of them do actually get returned. It's one of the few successes of the Sunak premiership that he managed to negotiate that. But it is true, and it's very interesting. Someone pointed out that the ticket to just fly from Albania to Britain is much cheaper than going through the illicit smuggling routes, which means that the only people who were not paying to do it in the legal way would have to have some reason to pay pay the more hefty fee, and that could only be that their passport would be rejected because they probably had a criminal background.
Right.
But I do think we've gone a little bit off of what the topic of this was. We can always get onto Albanian criminals somehow on this podcast, can't we?
And we didn't talk about the technical side of football at all.
I think there was some mention of it, but again, it's not my wheelhouse. So thank you both for carrying this this segment for me.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters. And if you want to see what else we're up to, you can follow Connor's series, Tomlinson Talks, this one about how to prevent population collapse with Paul Morland. And if you want to see all of the other work we put out, we always post links to our Twitter. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.